would like to at this time introduce your next speaker. Your speaker's daily radio program, Our Changing World, is now the most listened to radio series on earth. The program, broadcast on nearly 1,000 radio stations, is the largest in the history of broadcasting, with a huge audience of faithful listeners throughout the world. As to the background, for 4 years, Earl Nightingale was the voice of Sky King. In 1951, he created his own daily program on WGN radio in Chicago. He is often referred to as the Dean of Personal Motivation, making the study of people his life's work. Earl Nightingale, through Nightingale Conant Corporation, went on to produce and successfully market various audio and video tape series for training and self-development. His programs, Lead the Field and Great Ideas in Selling, are among the best-selling such programs in existence. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming Mr. Earl Nightingale.
Thank you, Don. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real privilege for me to be here today in your beautiful city on this lovely day. And I'd like to share with you, in the time that I have here, some ideas that I have found to be extremely important to me, my business, my family, and I hope that you will find them important too. The first point I want to make is that all of us have problems, and that our problems will only end when we do. We have national problems, corporate problems, family problems, personal problems. But there are two Chinese symbols which together form the ideograph for opportunity. One stands for trouble, the other for crisis. Trouble and crisis, when put together, represent opportunity. As the answer always lies in the question, so the opportunities of life lie directly in our problems. It's one of the most difficult things in the world to learn, but it is absolutely true. And in the problem itself always lies the answer to that problem. A great American educator, Arthur E. Morgan, noted that the process of constantly pressing upon one's limits is what makes life become larger. That habit can become one of the chief sources of enjoyment and interest in our lives. Those who find themselves bored and unhappy as the years progress and finally come to the end of their lives querulous and bitter are those who have never discovered the joys of pressing themselves, of searching for sources of strength, talent, and interest far beyond the safe and placid boundaries of their day-to-day experiences. I gave some flowers the other day to my secretary on National Secretary's Day, and she commented that they were very beautiful, but she said, you know, they don't smell good. And so I explained to her that flowers which are raised in a hothouse environment where everything is done for them simply don't have to attract insects anymore to pollinate themselves, so they lose their scent. It's the same with fruit that's raised under these same kind of circumstances. They don't taste as good as the apple we pick on grandfather's tree. They don't have to work hard to attract animals and birds to spread their seeds. When my son and I were visiting Australia's Great Barrier Reef this past March, we were amazed to discover, as we were told there, that the coral polyps on the inside of the reef, where they're protected, where the water is calm, tend to die and fall apart. While the coral polyps on the outside of the reef, where the breakers are pounding on them every day and every night, thrive and reproduce marvelously. And what I'm getting at is that we too are creatures. We are related to the coral polyps. And the human creature thrives at his very best in a climate of risk. And one of the paradoxes of modern life is that the thing the human being seeks most assiduously, a state of complete security, so-called, is the very state that's the worst for him. He works best, is at his best, and is happiest when he's working, stretching, reaching, trying to achieve new and more difficult goals. It's just the way it is. And of the millions of creatures that have appeared on this planet, more than 90% have become extinct. They could not handle change. They could not cope with risk. Marriages tend to survive the risks and hardships of working toward meaningful goals. It's when the goal has been reached that they fall apart. I wonder how many wives have said wistfully, you know, we were happier when we were living in that walk-up flat and working our tails off. There's a great educator by the name of Sidney Hook, who taught for many years at Columbia University, who said a very wise thing. He said that while anticipation is a marvelous thing and motivates us, the real disasters in life occur when we get what we want. Now, I want to modify that a little bit. There's nothing wrong with reaching our goals unless we sit on them, unless we stop there. And when we stop, we begin the process of dissolution, of falling apart. How do we know the true range of our growing capacities and the capacity of a 50-year-old man is greater than the capacity of a 45-year-old man, and so on? How do we know the true range of our growing capacities unless we keep pressing toward those goals that tend to fulfill us as persons, whatever they are, whatever you happen to desire? I saw a very funny cartoon in the Wall Street Journal not long ago. It showed two men standing on a busy corner in New York. One was dressed in a business suit. The other was wearing a toga, sandals, horn-rimmed glasses, and carrying a briefcase. And the one in the toga is saying to the other man, "I've found enlightenment, and I still pull down my $85,000 a year." Now it seems that will work for us. We can do both. We can reach the goals that we want, and we can still find the fulfillment, the peace, and these other things that we would also like to have. Now, it seems that as a species, collectively, we tend to want things as human beings that aren't good for us when a marvelous balance of maturity and education is missing. We do that as a species simply because the great majority of human beings lack the education and insight into what makes the human being happy and successful. And the majority constitutes a tremendous influence on us all. Freud and others discovered that there is a basic human dread of leaving the security of the family and venturing forth alone into the mysteries and dangers of the world. by belonging to a group, the larger the better, we're able to maintain the feeling of security and protection we knew as small children. These feelings are embedded in one's earliest experiences of comfortable merger with the family. People want to be led. They want others to make the important decisions for them, and they're willing to pay for the leadership they get, no matter how expensive or wrong-headed it may be. How many times have you sat in a restaurant and everyone's holding a menu and one of them says, "What are you having?" He just simply can't make up his mind. He wants you to order for him. I've seen people at stoplights that even after it turns green, they won't go until another car goes and indicates that it's okay to go ahead and pull out. It's like shooting at me will do no good. It's why most businesses look alike, as well as the people who run them, and think alike too. They wait for ideas to come from the home office or pick them up at the annual convention. Okay, there's a powerful human tendency to think that others are quite qualified to do our thinking for us. Perhaps we never think of it quite that way, but that's what it amounts to. But there are at least two very excellent reasons for questioning that idea and examining from time to time the present course of our lives and thinking. We can think as well as anyone else. The first is that we tend to settle for too small a portion of the richness, the real richness of life, and in fact usually don't even know the true direction to follow. As Americans, we often as not believe the answers are to be found in the collection of things. But as we pile things on top of things and new things on top of other things, we often find that we're not finding the happiness we sought. As one writer put it, we have built a technological tower to the moon. But as we look down from the top of our leaning tower, we find that we're no nearer heaven and that perhaps we'd better return to earth again. In Ernest Becker's excellent Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death, which I strongly recommend, it's in paperback, he points out that in our immaturity, we pile things on top of things because they give us symbolic reinforcement of our value as persons. They tell us how wonderful we are, and in our immaturity, we need that. When we hear of a pipeline explosion at a pumping station on the Alaska pipeline or an airplane disaster, we all seem to be oddly relieved when we hear someone say, "It was a human error." To know that our beloved machines were not to blame. The crowning proof of where modern science rates the human creature vis-a-vis other things was beautifully clarified, I think, by the development of the neutron bomb. It just kills people. It doesn't damage the real estate. The second important thing to remember is that until we get the human being back in first place, back on the very top of the pile of values, we're not going to have our heads on straight. Everything we do, all of our work, all of our striving and education and scientific investigation, every business and government agency exists in order to help men, women, and children lead better, more interesting, healthier, and effective and satisfying lives. When we get that straight, everything else has a way of falling into place. I remember hearing about a man who was watching television one Sunday afternoon, watching a football game, and his little boy, about 5 years old, kept bothering him, and so he reached down to the Sunday paper, and there was a full-page ad for TWA there with a big picture of the globe, and he tore it up in little pieces and gave the boy the torn up picture and some Scotch tape, and he said, "See if you can put the world together for Daddy." In just a couple of minutes, the boy came back with the whole thing put together, and he was astounded. He said, "How in the world did you do that?" And the boy said, "Well, there was a picture of a man on the other side, and when I got him together, the world was okay." We have a tendency to think that whatever people are doing in large numbers must be right because so many of them are doing it. As with so many popular beliefs, it turns out that just the opposite is true. One of the great American financiers and advisors to presidents, Bernard Baruch, was once asked by a reporter for the secret of his success. And he smiled, a wise old man, and he said, "I buy my straw hats in the fall." Here's a rule of thumb to keep in mind. Whatever the great majority of people is doing under any given circumstance, if you'll do exactly the opposite, you will probably never make another mistake as long as you live. I have never yet found an exception to that rule. It applies to getting an education, decorating your home, raising your children, handling your work, driving your car. As E.F. Schumacher has pointed out, millions slave in mindless and mind-rotting work without question, simply because others around them are doing the same thing. So collectively, we tend to want things that aren't good for us when the balance is missing. It's been only during the past few seconds of our species' existence on this planet that we've experienced general affluence, and only in this country. It's something new, even to the United States and Canada. For most of the rest of the world, it's still something to dream about and work toward, yet it's a sociological fact of life today in America that the American people are not happier now than they were during the Great Depression of the 30s. Now they weren't happier because they were poor. They were happier because they knew where they were going, what they were working toward. They had meaningful goals. They were striving. They were living in a state of risk. Affluence in many ways has sickened us as a society, as it will sicken any society, as it sickened the ancient Roman society and made it into a soft, overripe plum ready for picking by the hungry hordes. Affluence without corresponding wisdom and maturity makes the human creature ridiculous. There is nothing more ludicrous, more pitiful than the human being who thinks he already knows enough. Affluence causes us, if we're ill-equipped to handle it, to lose sight of what's important and what isn't. We tend to forget what brought affluence in the first place, which was meaningful, quality production that made this nation strong and the miracle that it became. It was productivity, hard work, meaningful goals. Production, ladies and gentlemen, is the key to the solution to our problems as a nation, as a community, as a family, and as individuals. Meaningful, intelligent production, quality production, and if possible, with flair. Now, the United States has softened in certain areas, as we've found by the productivity and inventiveness of Japan and West Germany and France and some other countries which are striving very hard to get what we've got. We still lead in most important areas, and we're waking up in many others. General Motors will spend over $1 billion in R&D, research and development, this year, as will IBM. Being successful should never be confused with remaining successful. Those are two distinctly different animals. And may I respectfully inquire how much you as a person are spending on R&D this year? How much of your take-home pay are you pumping back into quality products calculated to make you a more intelligent, creative, productive human creature? You know, once we decide on what we really want, we're certainly amazed at how little it really is. And then we discover that we can have what we want. We can have everything we want if we'll simply make up our minds as to what it is. People don't have trouble achieving their goals. Their difficulties stem from not setting them, from drifting, from being subject to every vague whim, every breeze and tide. We're like ships, quite often without rudders, subject to every wind and tide. Let me suggest that you turn your car into a learning center, that you listen while you're driving to the information that many companies, as well as my own, have put on tape cassettes. Build your office and home library of books. Spend an hour a day in the lonely hours reading, thinking, listening, setting goals, making notes, coming up with new and better, more effective, more creative ways of doing a better job of serving those you have chosen of your own free will to serve. If you'll do that, you need have no worries about the future. I hope I didn't give the impression that I'm anti-technology. I'm not. There are some towering and exciting problems that need solving in the world right now, and I'd like very much to see the United States solve more of them. And I think we can expect that. I believe that very soon now we will develop an alternative fuel that will liberate the whole world from the domination of a anachronistic fossil fuel, and then the Arabs can try selling sand. As far as we know, there's very little market for sand today. But we must keep technology in its place. It's exciting, it's wonderful, it's scary at times. It's awful, too, as we find new and more efficient ways to destroy ourselves. But there's nothing on earth, ladies and gentlemen, more important than a human creature. A little girl or boy, or an old man or woman, of any color whatever, in any country on this planet. Let me give you the definition of happiness. It's the best one I've ever found. It was given to us by a man believed to be the smartest man who ever lived, John Stuart Mill. It goes like this. Those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness, on the happiness of others, on the improvement of mankind, even on some art or pursuit, followed not as a means, but as itself an ideal end. That's the secret. Aiming at something else, he concluded, they find happiness by the way. It's only when we're doing something as an end in itself that happiness, like a butterfly, comes and settles on our sleeve. Now, in closing, a couple of reminders. Quality production is the answer. production, good quality production as a person. The great Abraham Maslow, president of the American Psychological Association, used to say that you judge a human being the same way you judge an apple tree, by its production. And Dean Briggs put it this way. He said, do your work, not just your work and no more, but a little more for the lavishing's sake, that little more which is worth all the rest. And if you doubt as you must, and if you suffer as you must, do your work. Put your heart into it, and the sky will clear. And then out of your very doubt and suffering will be born the supreme joy of life. Believe it or not, that's where it is. Number 2, set goals. Goals that are worthy of you. 3, keep that education going every day, a little bit. Learn to be a little smarter, a little gentler, a little kinder, a little more effective every day as a human creature. You'll never be bored, and you'll never get old. Our education should end when we do, and not one day before. This kind of an education I'm talking about will help us learn to love what doesn't cost much, and to love reading and conversation and music, and to do our work as well as we can learn to do it, to become professionals in a world of amateurs, to love people even though they're quite different from us, to love life for its own sake, and to love the sunrise and the sunset and the beating of rain on the roof and windows, or the gentle fall of snow on a winter day. This kind of an education helps us learn to love the companionship of dogs and the laughter and gaiety of children. But most of all, this kind of a daily education in those lonely hours will teach us to be free. Free from blind and mindless conformity, from tribalism and superstition, from the domination of things and the opinions of others. Education is the process by which we narrow the gap between where we are and what we are, and where we and want to be and become. A great American educator, Dr. Gilbert Hyatt of Columbia University, said, wholeness of mind and spirit is not a quality conferred on us by nature or by God. It is like health, virtue, and knowledge. We have the capacity to attain it, but to achieve it depends on our own efforts. In your dealing with people of all ages, little tiny children, old people, everybody in between, remember they want 3 things more than anything else in the world, and so do you and I. And they want them in this order of importance. Number 1, they want recognition, the opposite of anonymity, more than anything in the world. Recognize them, listen to them, look at them, and they'll bloom like flowers in the garden. 2, they want stimulation and change, the opposite of boredom. Keep things changing. Don't let things settle down into dull, dreary ruts of boredom. And 3, they want security. But it's in 3rd place, and there are several kinds of security. They want to be secure in our love, secure in our word, secure in our integrity, the product we sell, the people we are. Let's give them what they want, and they'll respond marvelously. And let me close with this little short 6-line poem written by one of my favorite poets, the Nobel Prize-winning poet from Calcutta, Rabindranath Tagore. Goes like this. I slept and dreamt that life was joy. I woke and saw that life was duty. I acted, and behold, duty was joy. Believe it or not, ladies and gentlemen, that's it. And thank you very much.